When I told my parents I got divorced because my husband used to beat me, my parents heartlessly abandoned me and my 5-month-old twins in the middle of a storm, saying, "You brought this shame on yourself. No decent woman gets beaten unless she deserves it. You're a pathetic failure who destroyed our family name, and we refuse to enable your weakness any longer." They decided to disown me completely and drove away, leaving us soaking in the rain. I stayed calm and took my kids to a shelter. But what happened next even made me tremble in fear. The rain hammered against my face as I watched my parents' Mercedes disappear into the storm. Olivia and Blake, my 5-month-old twins, cried in their carriers as water soaked through their blankets. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "You brought this shame on yourself." The woman who had once braided my hair and sung to me had just condemned me to the street with my babies. I'm Rebecca Mitchell, and at 26, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. 3 hours earlier, I had stood in my childhood home's pristine living room. My father stood behind his mahogany desk. My mother, Gloria, perched on her favorite armchair. The house smelled of lavender and old money. I had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but nothing could have prepared me for their reaction. "I filed for divorce," I had said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Ivan has been. He's been hitting me." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face turned stone cold, while my mother's expression shifted from shock to something I'd never seen before. Disgust. "Rebecca Elizabeth Mitchell," my father said slowly, using my full name like he did when I was a child in trouble. "Are you telling me you brought shame upon this family?" "Dad, he broke my ribs last month. I have hospital records." "I don't want to hear excuses," my mother interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "In my day, women knew how to handle their husbands properly. You must have provoked him." I stared at her, my own mother, the woman who had raised me to believe I could be anything. "You think I deserve to be beaten?" "I think you made your bed," she replied coldly. "And now you're running home like a coward instead of fixing your marriage." My father nodded gravely. "The Mitchell name has stood for respectability in this community for generations. We cannot and will not be associated with this failure." "What about your grandchildren?" I asked, gesturing to Olivia and Blake sleeping in their carriers. "They're innocent in all this." "They're reminders of your poor choices," my mother said. "You've already ruined their lives by breaking up their home." That's when they told me to leave. Not just their house, their lives completely. The storm had been brewing all day, and by the time they literally pushed me out the door, it was a full-blown tempest. I stood on their porch, babies in my arms, watching them close the door on 26 years of love, support, and family. The rain started almost immediately, as if the universe was crying with me. But I didn't cry. Not then. I had learned not to cry during the 2 years with Ivan. Tears only made things worse. I walked 6 blocks to the Mercy House Women's Shelter, my babies pressed against my chest, their cries mixing with the thunder. The shelter was a converted Victorian home with chipped paint and a warm light glowing from the windows. Sister Margaret, the elderly nun who ran it, took one look at me and ushered us inside. "Oh, dear child," she said, wrapping us in towels. "What brings you here on such a terrible night?" I told her everything, about Ivan, about the divorce, about my parents. She listened without judgment, occasionally making soft sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she guided me to a small room with twin beds and a crib. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." But I couldn't sleep. I lay on the narrow bed, listening to my babies breathe, and I planned. See, what my parents didn't know was that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And survivors don't just endure, they overcome. The next morning, I received a text from my childhood friend, Bethany Chen, who worked at the county courthouse. "Rebecca, I heard about the divorce. I'm so sorry. Call me when you can." Bethany had always been my closest friend, and she was one of the few people who knew the truth about Ivan Bennett. When I called her, she immediately offered to help. "I have some information you might find interesting," she said. "About your parents." It turned out that Bethany had been processing some legal documents at work when she noticed something unusual. My parents, the pillars of respectability, had been involved in some questionable financial dealings. My father's construction company had been taking shortcuts on city contracts, using substandard materials while charging premium prices. The paperwork was all there: falsified inspection reports, bribed officials, cover-ups. "The city's been investigating for months," Bethany told me. "They're building a case for fraud, conspiracy, and endangering public safety. Some of the buildings he cut corners on our schools, Rebecca. If this comes out..." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was bigger than I had imagined. "What can I do with this information?" "Well," Bethany said carefully, "as a concerned citizen, you could always bring this to the attention of the proper authorities, especially if you had, say, insider knowledge of the company's operations." And I did. I had worked in my father's office every summer during college, filing papers, organizing documents, answering phones. I knew where everything was kept, how the system worked, and most importantly, I knew about the safety deposit box where my father kept his most sensitive documents. But I wasn't ready to use that nuclear option yet. First, I needed to get my life together and protect my children. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding. I found a job at a local law firm, the same firm that had handled my divorce. Attorney Dorothy Hudson had been impressed with my knowledge and offered me a position as a paralegal. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and begin supporting my babies. The apartment was a tiny 2-bedroom in an older building, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt safe. No Ivan to tiptoe around. No parents to disappoint, just me and my babies. But my parents weren't done with me yet. 3 weeks after they had thrown me out, they started their campaign of harassment. It began with social media posts about family values and the importance of commitment in marriage. Subtle digs that anyone who knew me would understand were directed at me. Then came the calls to my new employer. Anonymous tips about my instability and poor judgment. Thankfully, Dorothy Hudson was a smart woman who saw through the manipulation, but it was clear my parents were trying to destroy any chance I had of rebuilding my life. That night, after putting the babies to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began planning my revenge. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to make them pay for what they had done to me and my children. I started by researching my father's company, Mitchell Construction. Using my knowledge of his filing system and some careful social engineering, I began gathering evidence of his fraudulent activities. I reached out to former employees who had been fired for refusing to participate in the cover-ups. I contacted families who had been affected by his shoddy work. The picture that emerged was damning. My father had been systematically defrauding the city for years, putting countless lives at risk to line his pockets. And my mother, as the company's bookkeeper, was complicit in every aspect of the scheme. But I needed more than just evidence. I needed the perfect moment to strike. That moment came 2 months later during the annual Founders' Day celebration. My parents were being honored as Citizens of the Year for their outstanding contribution to the community. The ceremony was being held at the city's newest elementary school, one of the buildings my father had cut corners on. I had been working with Bethany to coordinate with the FBI and the city's prosecutor's office. The investigation was ready to go public, but they needed someone with insider knowledge to provide testimony, someone who understood the inner workings of the company and could explain the complex financial schemes. I volunteered. The plan was simple but devastating. During the ceremony, as my parents were being presented with their award, FBI agents would serve them with warrants for their arrest. The media would be there to capture every moment. And I would be there in the audience with my babies, watching justice unfold. But I had one more surprise in store. The morning of the ceremony, I received a call from Ivan Bennett. He was drunk, angry, and demanding to see his children. I had been expecting this call for weeks. "Rebecca, you can't keep my kids from me," he slurred into the phone. "I'm their father. You're a man who beat their mother, I replied calmly. You have no rights here. I'll take you to court. I'll prove you're an unfit mother, just like your parents said. That's when I knew he had been in contact with my parents. They were coordinating their attacks on me, trying to use him to get custody of my children. The thought made my blood boil. Ivan, I said sweetly, why don't you come to the Founders' Day ceremony tonight? There's something there you'll find very interesting. He agreed, probably thinking I was going to reconcile with my parents and that he could use that to his advantage. He had no idea what was coming. The ceremony began at 7 o'clock. The elementary school's gymnasium was packed with the city's elite, all there to celebrate my parents' supposed contributions to the community. I sat in the back with Olivia and Blake, watching as my parents took their seats at the head table. My mother was wearing her best dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. My father was in his navy suit, the one he wore to all important events. They looked so proud, so confident in their untouchable status. Ivan Bennett arrived halfway through the opening remarks, clearly drunk but trying to hide it. He spotted me in the back and made his way over, ignoring the dirty looks from other attendees. There's my beautiful wife, he said loudly, causing people to turn and stare. And my perfect children. Ex-wife, I corrected him. And you're drunk. Just a little celebration, he said, swaying slightly. Your parents told me all about how you've been struggling, how you're not fit to raise these kids alone. Ivan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. In about 10 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why my parents and I aren't speaking. He looked confused, but before he could respond, Mayor Johnson took the podium to begin the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor began, tonight, we honor two individuals who have dedicated their lives to building our community. Warren and Gloria Mitchell have been pillars of strength, integrity, and service. As the mayor spoke, I watched my parents' faces. They were glowing with pride, completely oblivious to what was coming. In the audience, I could see FBI agents positioned at strategic points throughout the room. Bethany was near the front, her phone ready to record everything. It is my great pleasure to present Warren and Gloria Mitchell with this year's Citizens of the Year award. The crowd erupted in applause as my parents stood and walked to the podium. My father took the microphone, his voice booming with confidence. Thank you so much for this honor, he began. Gloria and I have always believed that a strong community is built on strong families, strong values, and strong commitments. We've tried to live our lives as examples of these principles. I almost laughed at the irony. The man who had abandoned his daughter and grandchildren was lecturing about family values. And we hope that our work with Mitchell Construction has made our city a safer, better place for all our children. That was the cue. As my father continued his speech, FBI agents began moving through the crowd. I could see them positioning themselves near the exits, their badges hidden, but their purpose clear. Then I saw Agent Martinez, the lead investigator I had been working with, standing near the side door. He gave me a small nod. It was time. I stood up, Olivia and Blake in my arms, and began walking toward the front of the room. People turned to look at me, some recognizing me as the Mitchell's daughter, others wondering why I was interrupting the ceremony. My father saw me first. His face went pale, and he stopped speaking mid-sentence. My mother followed his gaze, and her expression changed from pride to pure panic. Dad, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium sound system as I approached the podium. Mom, I'm so glad you're both here tonight. The crowd murmured with confusion. My father tried to recover, forcing a smile. Rebecca, this isn't the time or place. Oh, but it is, I interrupted, taking the microphone from his hand. See, everyone came here tonight to honor you for your contributions to the community. I think they deserve to know the truth about those contributions. I turned to face the crowd, my babies still in my arms. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and these are my children, Olivia and Blake. 2 months ago, my parents disowned us because I had the audacity to divorce my abusive husband. They called me a failure, a disgrace, and they literally threw us out into a storm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could see people's faces changing as they processed what I was saying. But that's not why I'm here tonight, I continued. I'm here because my father's company, Mitchell Construction, has been systematically defrauding this city for years. The building we're standing in right now was built with substandard materials while the city paid premium prices. The roof above our heads might not survive the next major storm. The crowd was in complete chaos now. People were looking up at the ceiling, murmuring to each other, some starting to move toward the exits. The FBI has been investigating Mitchell Construction for months, I said. And tonight, they have enough evidence to bring charges. That's when Agent Martinez stepped forward, his badge now visible. Warren and Gloria Mitchell, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and endangering public safety. What happened next was pure pandemonium. My parents were handcuffed at the podium while cameras flashed and people shouted questions. Ivan, who had been watching everything in stunned silence, tried to grab my arm. Rebecca, what the hell is happening? He demanded. I looked at him with the same calm expression I had worn the night they threw me out. Justice, Ivan. This is what justice looks like. He started to say something else, but then Detective Williams appeared beside him with two uniformed officers. Ivan Bennett, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order and assault. It turned out that while I had been building my case against my parents, Bethany had been working with the prosecutor's office to build a case against Ivan Bennett. The hospital records from my injuries, combined with testimony from neighbors who had heard the fights, were enough to charge him with domestic violence. As they led my parents and Ivan Bennett away in handcuffs, I stood on the stage holding my babies, watching the crowd disperse in shock and confusion. The local news crews captured every moment, and I knew that by morning, the story would be everywhere. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I held a press conference outside the courthouse. Reporters from 3 states were there, along with families affected by my father's shoddy construction work. I stood behind a podium, Olivia and Blake in their carriers beside me, and told the world exactly what had happened. My parents taught me that actions have consequences, I said. They taught me that you reap what you sow. They taught me that family means standing by each other through thick and thin. Unfortunately, they forgot to follow their own lessons. I went on to detail the years of fraud, the cover-ups, the bribery. I explained how my father's greed had put countless lives at risk, including the children who attended school in buildings that might not be structurally sound. But most importantly, I said, I want other women to know that you don't have to accept abuse. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let anyone, not your husband, not your parents, not society, tell you that you deserve to be hurt. The press conference was a media sensation. Within hours, #Rebecca Mitchell was trending on social media. Women from across the country shared their own stories of abuse and abandonment. Support groups invited me to speak. Book publishers called with offers. But the real victory came 3 weeks later. I was at home feeding Olivia while Blake napped when I received a call from Agent Martinez. Rebecca, I thought you'd want to know. Your father just agreed to a plea deal. He's looking at 18 years in federal prison. Your mother got 15. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. These were still my parents, despite everything they had done. But they had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. What about the families affected by the construction fraud? I asked. The court is setting up a victim compensation fund using the assets seized from Mitchell Construction. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start. A month later, I received an unexpected visitor. Sister Margaret from the shelter knocked on my apartment door, carrying a large envelope. Rebecca, dear, she said, I have something for you. Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000 and a letter from an anonymous donor. The letter read, for a woman who showed incredible courage in the face of adversity. Use this to build the life you and your children deserve. I later learned that the anonymous donor was Dorothy Hudson, my boss at the law firm. She had been so impressed with my resilience and determination that she had decided to help me get back on my feet properly. With the money, I was able to rent a larger apartment in a safe neighborhood with an option to buy after 2 years of good rental history. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I set up a small garden on the balcony and painted the nursery soft yellow because I wanted Olivia and Blake to grow up knowing they were loved and wanted. But before I could reach that final moment of justice, there were more battles to fight and more revelations to uncover. 2 weeks after the arrests, I received an unexpected phone call from Detective Williams, the officer who had been investigating Ivan Bennett's violation of the restraining order. "Rebecca, we need to talk. There's something you need to know about your ex-husband and your parents." I met Detective Williams at a coffee shop downtown, leaving Olivia and Blake with Mrs. Chen, Bethany's mother, who had become like a grandmother to them. The detective looked tired, his usually neat appearance disheveled. "What I'm about to tell you might be difficult to hear," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "We've been monitoring Ivan Bennett's phone calls from jail, and we discovered he's been in contact with your parents for months, long before the night they threw you out." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were transcripts of phone calls, text messages, and email exchanges between Ivan and my parents dating back to when I was still married to him. "They knew," I whispered, reading through the evidence. "They knew he was beating me and they encouraged him to keep me in line." The detective nodded grimly. "Your mother's exact words were, 'A firm hand is sometimes necessary to guide a wayward wife.' Your father told Ivan that real men don't let their wives disrespect them." I felt sick reading their words. There were dozens of messages where my parents offered Ivan Bennett advice on how to control me, how to isolate me from friends, how to make me financially dependent on him. They had been orchestrating my abuse from the beginning. "There's more," Detective Williams continued. "After you left Ivan Bennett, your parents offered to help him get custody of the twins. They were funding his legal fees and had already hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on you. The private investigator had been following me for weeks, photographing me at the shelter, documenting my daily routines, trying to find evidence that I was an unfit mother. The photos were all there in the folder, me carrying groceries, playing with my babies at the park, walking to work. They were building a case to prove you were unstable," the detective explained. "The plan was to have Ivan Bennett file for full custody with your parents as backup guardians. They wanted to take your children away from you permanently." I stared at the photos of myself, unaware that I was being hunted like prey. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because we need your help to build a stronger case against all of them. This goes beyond fraud and domestic violence. This is conspiracy, stalking, and attempted kidnapping. But we need you to testify about the pattern of abuse and control." I agreed immediately. The thought that my parents had been pulling Ivan Bennett's strings all along, that they had been complicit in every bruise, every broken bone, every moment of terror, filled me with a cold fury I had never experienced before. That night, I called Dorothy Hudson at home. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need your legal advice." Dorothy came over within an hour, bringing Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. As we sat in my small living room, Olivia and Blake playing on a blanket at our feet, I told her everything Detective Williams had revealed. "Rebecca," Dorothy said carefully, "what you're describing is a criminal conspiracy that spans years. Your parents weren't just guilty of construction fraud. They were accessories to domestic violence and potentially attempted kidnapping." She explained that the evidence could be used to file additional charges against my parents and Ivan Bennett, but it would also mean reopening wounds I had been trying to heal. "Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to relive all of this in court?" I looked at my babies, so innocent and trusting, and I knew I had to protect them from the people who had tried to destroy us. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparations. I spent hours with prosecutors, going through every detail of my marriage, every interaction with my parents, every moment of abuse and manipulation. It was exhausting and traumatic, but I knew it was necessary. During this time, I also received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor from my childhood home, knocked on my door on a rainy Tuesday evening. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, and she had always been like a grandmother to me. Rebecca, dear, she said, I've been following the news about your parents. I wanted to give you something. She handed me a small wooden box that I recognized from her mantelpiece. Inside were dozens of photographs and documents dating back decades. I've been documenting your father's business practices for years, she explained. My late husband worked for the city inspector's office, and he told me about the bribes and the cover-ups. I kept copies of everything, thinking someday someone would need proof. The box contained a treasure trove of evidence, photographs of substandard construction, copies of falsified inspection reports, records of payments to city officials. It was enough to extend my father's criminal liability back 15 years. Why didn't you ever come forward? I asked. Mrs. Patterson sighed. Your parents were powerful people in this town. My husband was afraid of losing his job, and after he died, I was afraid of what they might do to me. But seeing what they did to you and those precious babies, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Her evidence would prove to be crucial in the prosecution's case, but it also revealed something else. My parents had been destroying lives long before they destroyed mine. There were families who had lost their homes due to my father's shoddy construction. City workers who had been fired for refusing to participate in the corruption. Small business owners who had been driven out of business for competing with my father's company. I began reaching out to these victims, and slowly, a network of people affected by my parents' crimes began to emerge. We formed a support group, meeting weekly at the community center. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, whose family had been forced to move out of their apartment when the building's foundation cracked due to substandard concrete. There was Mr. Thompson, a former city inspector who had been blacklisted for refusing to approve one of my father's projects. There was Janet Morrison, whose husband had been injured when a balcony collapsed at one of my father's construction sites. Each person had a story, and each story added another layer to the prosecution's case. But more importantly, each person represented a life that had been damaged by my parents' greed and corruption. One evening, as I was preparing dinner for Olivia and Blake, I received a call through the prison's official collect call system. The automated system announced, "You have a collect call from Gloria Mitchell at the Federal Correctional Institution. Will you accept the charges?" Against my better judgment, I accepted. "Rebecca, it's your mother. I need to talk to you," Gloria said, her voice strained. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. You have nothing to say that I want to hear." "I'm dying, Rebecca." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything she had done, she was still my mother. "What do you mean?" "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "How long have you known?" 2 months, since before the arrest. Her voice broke. "Rebecca, I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. I never meant for you to get hurt. But you did mean for me to stay with Ivan Bennett. You did mean for me to endure his abuse. I thought marriage was about endurance. My mother taught me that a woman's job was to support her husband no matter what. I thought I was teaching you to be strong." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, and I hated myself for it. "You taught me that I didn't matter. You taught me that my pain was acceptable as long as it preserved your reputation." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." There was a long silence between us. In the background, I could hear Olivia babbling to herself as she played with her toys. Finally, I spoke. "I can't forgive you," I said. "Not for what you did to me and not for what you tried to do to my children, but I don't wish you pain. Can I see them? Just once. I know I don't deserve it, but they're my grandchildren, and I'm going to die without ever holding them." I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say yes, to give her that small comfort in her final months. But then I remembered the night she threw us out in the storm, the way she had looked at Olivia and Blake like they were burdens rather than blessings. "No," I said finally. "I won't expose my children to toxicity, even if it comes from family. You made your choice that night. Now you have to live with it. I hung up the phone and held my babies close, breathing in their sweet scent and feeling their warm bodies against mine. They were my family now, along with the chosen family I had built from friends and supporters and fellow survivors. 3 days later, I learned that my mother had attempted suicide in her jail cell. She survived, but the incident made headlines and added another layer of complexity to the case. The prosecution was concerned that a jury might feel sympathy for her, given her illness and her apparent remorse. But I knew better. My mother's suicide attempt wasn't about genuine remorse. It was about control. Even from jail, even facing death, she was trying to manipulate the narrative to make herself the victim rather than the perpetrator. I met with the prosecutors and made it clear that I wanted to proceed with all charges. She had cancer when she threw me and my babies out in the storm, I reminded them. She had cancer when she was helping Ivan Bennett plan to take my children away. Her illness doesn't erase her crimes. The trial preparation intensified. I spent hours with the prosecution team, going through every detail of the case. We practiced my testimony until I could recite it without breaking down. We prepared for every possible line of defense the other side might use. But the hardest part was the psychological evaluation. The defense team had requested a mental health assessment, claiming that the stress of the situation had affected my memory. I had to sit through hours of interviews with court-appointed psychologists, reliving every moment of trauma while they took notes and asked probing questions. Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychologist who conducted most of the evaluation, was a kind woman who specialized in domestic violence cases. After our final session, she pulled me aside. "Rebecca, I want you to know that in 20 years of doing this work, I've never seen someone with your level of resilience and clarity. You've been through hell, but you've emerged stronger and more determined than most people I've encountered." Her words meant more to me than any legal victory could. They confirmed what I had come to believe about myself, that I was not a victim anymore, but a survivor who had chosen to fight back. The psychological evaluation also revealed something else. Olivia and Blake were thriving. Despite everything they had been through in their short lives, they were healthy, happy, and securely attached to me. The evaluator noted that my parenting was exceptional under the circumstances and that the children showed no signs of trauma or neglect. As the trial date approached, I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. The nightmares about Ivan had stopped. The anxiety about my parents' judgment had faded. I was no longer the scared woman who had stood in the rain with her babies. I was someone who had chosen to fight for justice, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been hurt by the people I once trusted most. The night before the trial began, I sat in my living room with Olivia and Blake, reading them a bedtime story. They were both nearly asleep, their small hands clutching their favorite stuffed animals. As I looked at their peaceful faces, I made a silent promise to them and to myself, I would see this through to the end, no matter how painful it became. The final piece of my revenge came 6 months later during my parents' sentencing hearing. The judge allowed me to read a victim impact statement, and I had spent weeks preparing what I wanted to say. "Your Honor," I began, standing at the podium in the courtroom where my parents sat in orange jumpsuits. "For 26 years, I believed that Warren and Gloria Mitchell were good people. They taught me about honesty, integrity, and the importance of family. It took me years to realize that they were teaching me these values while failing to live them themselves." I looked directly at my parents as I spoke. My mother was crying, but my father stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. When I was being beaten by my husband, I thought my parents would be my safe harbor. Instead, they became another storm I had to weather. They abandoned me and their grandchildren because they cared more about their reputation than their own family. I paused, letting my words sink in. But in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift of all. They forced me to find my own strength. They forced me to stand up not just for myself but for all the people they had hurt with their greed and corruption. I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I don't ask for mercy for these defendants. They showed no mercy to the families living in unsafe buildings. They showed no mercy to the city they betrayed. And they showed no mercy to me and my children when we needed them most. The judge sentenced my father to 20 years in federal prison. My mother got 18. They would both be eligible for parole in 12 years, but by then, Olivia and Blake would be teenagers who could make their own decisions about whether they wanted any relationship with their grandparents. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The scared, beaten woman who had stood in the rain with her babies was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you love the most. But I had also learned that you don't have to let that hurt define you. You can choose to turn it into strength, into purpose, into justice. 3 years later, I'm in my final year of law school, having received a full scholarship for survivors of domestic violence. I plan to specialize in domestic violence cases and construction fraud when I graduate and pass the bar exam. Olivia and Blake are healthy, happy 3-year-olds who laugh easily and hug freely. They'll never know the fear I once lived with. My parents write me letters from prison sometimes. They're full of apologies and regrets, begging for forgiveness and a chance to know their grandchildren. I don't answer them, not because I'm cruel, but because I've learned that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. The larger apartment I rented with Dorothy's gift has become a gathering place for other survivors. We meet monthly, sharing stories, offering support, and reminding each other that we're stronger than we know. Some of the women are just starting their journeys to freedom. Others, like me, are years into rebuilding their lives. But all of us know one fundamental truth: we survived. We overcame. And we refuse to let anyone else's definition of our worth become our reality. The storm that night wasn't just weather. It was a metaphor for the tempest that had been building in my family for years. My parents thought they could control the narrative, that they could abandon me and face no consequences. They thought their reputation would protect them, that their money would buy them immunity. They were wrong. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't plotting and scheming. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be the victim anymore. It's standing up, speaking out, and letting the truth do the work for you. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice feels like standing in your own home, holding your sleeping children, and knowing that you built this life with your own hands, your own strength, and your own refusal to give up. The storm passed. The sun came out.